right, good evening, everybody. Tonight, we're going to talk about strength. And last week, Gene talked about what it means to be secure. And tonight, I'm going to talk about what it means to be strong, at least the way God makes people strong. And God's truth, it's really the only way to be strong. And so before we get into that, I want to tell you a story that kind of makes the point of the message tonight. And this is the message, that strength comes in surprising ways to surprising people. Okay? It doesn't come to those that you would expect. So whatever you're thinking right now about strength and who's strong and who's not, really strength comes in surprising ways to surprising people. And there's a great example of this in history, and you'll figure out who I'm talking about in just a moment. It's a very obvious one of someone that no one would think is strong, but really she was. So the setting is 15th century France. The country of France is in a terrible war with the English, and it's been going on for over 100 years. It was such a long war that they actually named it the 100 Years' War. The British, or the English and the French are fighting over French lands. There had been some intermarriage that had taken place, and so because of that, the British believed that they had claim to French lands now that there wasn't a unified king in France. And so the thing is just a big mess. France is falling apart. They don't have a unified king. They can't agree on anything, and even cities like Paris had pledged their loyalty to the English king and not the other French nobility. And so there was fighting amongst the French, they're fighting the English, and this is going on for 100 years. 100 plus years. Imagine that. That's like 3 generations living with nothing but war. And when things were about to get as bad as they could get, God began to speak to a 16-year-old girl, okay? So our high school kids, all right? I know why we don't expect a lot from them, but we should probably expect more from them, okay? But a 16-year-old girl began to hear from the Lord, and you probably figured out who I'm talking about. It's Joan of Arc. Hollywood makes us think that she was crazy. She really wasn't, because people do hear from God. And God gave her a specific mission, and that was to lead the army to win some battles, to free some cities, and to set up a man who wasn't even convinced yet himself that he should be king. Okay, so no small task. So at age 17, she makes her way into the royal court of France and begins to tell them the vision that God has given her. And basically what she's asking for is their army and the authority to lead the army into battle. A 17-year-old girl, peasant girl who's uneducated, is doing this. So make the connection to modern day. That would be like someone today walking into the Pentagon and saying, give me the army and the authority and we'll go kill the terrorists. Okay? That would be absurd, wouldn't it? We would laugh. But somehow, in God's providence and her relentlessness, because she kept going back over and over and over again, and in France's just desperation, they finally said yes, saying, we just need to shut this girl up. We'll see what she can do. Well, she won one battle after another. She freed the great city of Orleans, and then she went to that very passive and weak young man who was meant to be the king. And this was an important part because France needed a unified king, and he's the only one that pledged kind of the allegiance of all the groups. She convinced them that now was the time that he was the king, and so with an army, she marched him to the city where kings were crowned, and she crowned him king. Her accomplishments are great. It turned the war, it changed history, it changed French history. I tell you the story not to talk about her accomplishments, but to make the point that God brings strength to surprising people in surprising ways. Strength is not what we think. Strength is not received from the places we think that you receive it. And most of us don't even understand what strength is meant for. And so that's what tonight's message is for. I'll tell you where the message came from. There's a lady that's here in the service that after I taught on Zedekah, the Hebrew word for righteousness and justice, and I was sharing from Isaiah chapter 61, verse 3, and here it is up here. I was talking about Zedekah, or the Zedek, and how God is the righteous one, and he turns us into people who do righteous acts. I was walking out of here, and this really sweet lady came up to me. She goes, Brian, there's another neat word in this passage. Do you know about that word for oaks? And I said, no. I mean, how special can a word be about a tree? And she said, well, the word is actually a title. It's the word Ayil, which means the strong ones. And this strong ones title is given to a number of different things, like the great trees, certain wood, certain people, and I'll describe them in a moment. And she said, it's a special word, you might want to look into it. So I looked into it, and I was impressed. She was right. And so someone here in the service picked our word for the week. We pulled some other words, changed the schedule to fit this in, and so it was neat that contributions come all the time from different places. Ayil, the strong ones. We actually have a modern day equivalent of this word in English, and it's the word stud. Okay, we're going to get spiritual tonight. We're going to talk about studs. And we use the word stud to describe a number of different things, not just beings or people that are strong. And so you think of a horse. A horse becomes a stud because he's strong and he's fast, and they want that horse's line to continue on, and so that horse makes lots of babies. All right, that's what we call a stud. Or you can think about strong lumber. You go to the hardware store and you buy 2x4s, but what do we call those 2x4s? The strong wood that we used to build walls, we call them studs, right? Because they're able to carry a heavy load. I call dependable people studs. I love that word. I just love that it fit in the message today because I love the word. I call so many people studs. When I call women studs, they look at me like I'm strange. But they are. They're dependable. They're awesome. You can count on them. You can call strong, robust athletes strong. It shows up in a number of different ways. It's a title that reflects strength and an ability to have some power. That's what Ayil is. All right, so let's get into the message. It occurs in Isaiah chapter 61 is where our message comes from, and you'll see one of the occurrences of the word, the place that I learned it from, and I'm going to read it to you now. Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 4, the strong ones. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. By the way, ashes is a symbol for death, so beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks, Ayil, the strong ones of righteousness, Zedek, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. Right, let me tell you what's happening in the passage here. Ancient Israel is in big trouble. In fact, they're in a terrible place. They've been hauled off into exile. They're slaves, political slaves in Babylon, and they have no hope, and they're in a very, very tough place. And so you see a description of the tough place there, and they're brokenhearted. They have a spirit of despair. And God gives them a vision for themselves as a group of people together. And the vision is that God will turn them and make them as into an Ayil. They will be like an Ayil, and they would have known the word. It had been very interesting that God would choose to use the word, I will make you into a strong one. He's giving them a vision for themselves. Now, what's special, though, is that years later, when Jesus was starting his ministry, he could have read a number of passages to kind of kick things off. And this is the one he chose. There were many options. He chose this one. He read Isaiah 61, this very passage, Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, and he went through the list. And he said, this has been fulfilled for you today. And so what this means is because Jesus was sent to the entire world, that although this was a vision for Israel thousands of years ago, this is a vision for any person who puts themselves in the care of Jesus. Which means that this is a vision for each one of us if we're in his hands. It means this is a vision for any person that has ever lived. Now let me talk about vision for a moment so you understand what I'm talking about. A vision is something that's spoken to you or over you from someone in your life. They see something in you that could be. And so they'll come to you and they'll say something like, you could be this, or this might happen for you. But what they do is they speak into your life of what could be. It's a great gift. And hopefully you've had someone in your life do that for you. What's special about God speaking vision over us, Jesus speaking vision over us, it's not just what could be, it's what should be and what will be. It's not just a good idea of something that's practical, because one of the things about vision is it has to be possible. If someone were to come up to say to me, Brian, you're going to be a famous musician someday, I would laugh. Not possible. That's not vision. That's dreaming for dreaming's sake. But vision is something that is possible, that has to do with your own character, your place in life, and your talents. God speaks vision over us. It's not just what could be, it's what should be and what will be. And this is an incredible gift. I really hope someone spoke vision into your life before. I've been formed by people speaking vision over me. When I was young, I can think of a number of places my mom and dad did this for me. In 4th grade, I got a C for the first time, and I thought I was a total failure. Nowadays, C sounds pretty good. But back then, I thought I was a total failure, and I couldn't crack the code of fourth grade science, but the code was really Mrs. Kane, and she was like my arch nemesis, this teacher. She told me over and over again she liked me, but I didn't understand. But we had a hard time. So my mom and dad were always telling me, Brian, you can get that C up. You need to work hard. I worked really, really hard. They were kind of right. I didn't quite get it to an A, but I got it to a B. But the vision spoke over me. When I was bullied by a guy named John from kindergarten through fifth grade, my mom and dad over and over again cast vision for me, which is someday you will stand up to that bully. Someday you should stand up to that bully. Someday you will stand up to that bully. And I'm proud to say that day came and the family celebrated. It was awesome. I needed the confidence that comes from someone saying this is what could be. My mom and dad would speak vision in greater ways over me, like being a good husband or a good father. You need to hear that. Hopefully you've heard some of those things from your parents or someone that you trust. When I was 14, I heard from a wrestling coach I could be a state champion. That doesn't mean anything to you, but as a young wrestler, it means a lot. I needed to hear it. As a pastor in Greeley, I heard from another pastor there. She actually said to me one day, she goes, Brian, someday you should be a good pastor. And I'm thinking, I'm a pastor right now. And she was communicating, someday you should be a good pastor. But I needed to hear it. Vision challenges us. It provokes us to be more than we can be on our own. And that is exactly what's happening in the passage. God takes people, ordinary people who have gone through things, and he takes them and doesn't keep them ordinary, but he turns them into this incredible person that the only word to describe him, at least the one they chose here, is a strong one, an Ayil. And you're going to see how special that word is in just a moment. But before I get there, I want you to notice something. To be a strong one, it does not matter where you have been, what has happened to you, how you have failed, how you feel about yourself right now. It does not matter because it is not your vision for yourself. It's God's vision for you. There are no lost causes, no dead ends. Notice the description of those who are becoming the strong ones in the passage. Those that are poor, they have nothing. Those that are brokenhearted, their dreams have been dashed. They've lost relationships. They've been deeply hurt. Captives, those that are trapped, they're stuck. Maybe they're sick. They're powerless against something that's holding them back. They're in darkness. When I think of darkness, I just think of the darkness inside each one of us, those sins that we don't want anyone to know about, that we keep secret. He's describing those people becoming the strong ones. Those that mourn. To mourn means to have deep sorrow or regret. Those that grieve, to suffer loss. Those that experience death, those ashes. And then it's all summed up with this phrase, they have a spirit of despair. What a horrible way to have your life described, or your countenance described, a spirit of despair. These are ordinary people who are going through something, they're struggling and suffering, and God says, here's the vision for you, that you're going to be a strong one. So the good news is for anyone in the room that you don't think of yourself as strong right now, the good news is it does not matter because he does. And for those in the room that think of themselves strong, at least in the way of the world, God comes and he challenges us and he says, that is not my way of strength. Strength comes in surprising ways to surprising people. And you too have something to learn. The wounds, the losses, the regrets, and the struggles, what's great about it, because life is full of those things, they're almost prerequisites to becoming strong. They're assets God uses. When we are weak, he is strong. And so everyone in the room, whether you feel weak or strong, we have something to learn from this word. And so let's go through the many different uses of the word that I was taught here a few months ago that I want to share with you. The first use of the word is Ayil was used to describe certain types of trees in ancient Israel. Two trees in particular, the Mediterranean oak tree and the terebinth tree. And they actually look very similar. If you Google them, you can look at them. But they're very large trees that because of their strength in their root system, they were allowed to live for hundreds of years. And so generation after generations would enjoy these trees. They were very big. And these trees were able somehow to live in very arid climates in the desert. And so just out of the middle of the desert, you would often find one of these strong trees. And these are the trees that were referred to as Ayils. Not every tree got the title of an Ayil. In Isaiah 61, we see mention of an oak, right? One of those trees, but these trees are special. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 29, we see that they're referred to as the sacred oaks. At some time, they're even seen as measures of wealth. The word for sacred oak in Isaiah chapter 1 is Ayil. But here's what's special about the Ayils that were found in the desert. If you're trying to navigate, which is what ancient people did, Bedouin people, with their sheep and their goats, and you're traveling around a desert, a featureless desert, and there happens to be a few of these strong trees, what would you do with the trees generation after generation? You would use them as landmarks. And you would navigate your way through the desert by moving from tree to tree or different feature to different feature. These trees provided direction for people on their journey, okay? And what else would you do if you walked upon a big tree when you've been in the middle of a hot desert for a long time? You sit down and you rest, don't you? You camp there, you sit under the shade, you take a nap. And so if you're beginning to make a connection to this term Ayil to a person, you can make the connection that an Ayil, at least the way God was talking about it as a vision for us, is someone who provides direction and relief for other people, just like those great trees did. The second use of the word was used to describe strong wood, okay? So it was used in a number of different ways. First Kings, it mentions doorposts, and actually the doors themselves were made out of Ayil, the strongest wood around. You can read in, where's the passage? Ezekiel chapter 40, the porticos or the pillars that were in temples and large buildings were made out of the Ayil, the strongest wood. The corner posts in tents that many of these people had were the Ayil posts. They were the strongest of all the wood. And why would you put them in the corner or make them a post? So that they could carry the heaviest load. They were able to carry a heavy load. So you make a connection. The Ayil as wood was used to build structures, to provide structure, and to carry the heaviest load. So make a connection to a person, because this is a gift he's giving us. This is a vision for each one of us. You are to be like a person that can carry a heavy load for others. But remember who he's talking to, those that are brokenhearted, those that are victims, those that have been hurt. And he's saying, you can provide direction. You can provide shelter. You can carry a heavy load for others. Here's the third use of the word. It's used to describe warriors or strong men or strong fighting men. Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 13. You can read through there, but it says the leading men. Other versions say the mighty men or the fighting men. The word is Ayil of the land. It describes what happens to him. 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 14. It says of the fighting men. The fighting men are called the Ayils. Remember, so the word's showing up in a different use. It's the strong men, the physically strong men of a tribe, the warriors. And if you think about the task of warriors, at least as it relates to Israel, because they were different. Every tribe, every country had warriors. They had those that would fight. There were evil nations that just went out and killed for killing's sake. That was not the case with Israel. But they had warriors. They had soldiers. And the job of the warriors, first of all, was to protect the people. If someone came into your camp, it was the Ayils that would stand up and fight. They would have to find the courage to protect and defend those that were under their care. If a father protected his family from someone, he might be referred to as an Ayil, a strong warrior. But what's the other job of a warrior, at least in ancient Israel? It wasn't just to protect, but it was also to take new ground that God had given them. It was to see something in the future and move ahead, to take a risk, to move in a new direction and to take new ground. And think of the courage it takes to do that. And who was it that would do this? They said, let's go get our Ayils. And let's go take that land that the Lord has given us. Or let's go find our Ayils so that they might protect us because danger is around the corner. Courage, protection, and even ambition to take new ground was synonymous with an Ayil. Let me give you a couple illustrations, at least what it means to be protective. Because hopefully, and this is not very common, that you have to physically protect someone in our day and age. We live in Boulder County. It's about as safe as it gets, okay? Life would be more exciting if we had to, but this is where God put us, so we'll just put up with it, okay? But here's some examples of protecting someone. A number of us have children that are getting to the age where they like being on the internet. Well, we know the internet's dangerous, right? Pornography is addictive. People are trying to get our kids' attention. And if we do not monitor their phone use, their internet use, we are not protecting them. When a parent takes responsibility and provides protection from this danger, and it is a danger, they are acting like a strong one that Jesus described or called us. when he referred to Isaiah chapter 61. Here's another example. I have a friend he's not very big, he's unassuming, and his sister was being abused by her husband. So he took a trip to the south, and he visited his brother-in-law, and he said, I know what's happening. He said, if I ever hear that it's happening again, I'll be back, and you won't be happy. Now, he's not a violent man. He's a gentle man. But you know what he was doing? He was acting out of godly strength to protect. In modern culture, we take this type of thing for granted until we need protection. That's who's referred to as the Ayils, those that protect, those that have courage. Fourth use of the word, for those that were the leaders or the chiefs of the tribes of these nations. Exodus chapter 15, Ayil, chief is the word that we get, but it was really the word Ayil in Hebrew. The chiefs, Ayil of Edom, will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. It's talking about when the Israelites are coming, they're afraid. It refers to their leaders, their chiefs, as the Ayils, those that have leadership positions. Ezekiel chapter 31, rulers of the nations as the Ayils. So it's those that have, in a sense, the power, the decision-making power. They're called Ayils. They're the strong ones. They have influence. They're able to do things with. Ayils were often used, at least when it came to ancient Israelites and their culture, the sages in a community. Not just the chiefs and not just the leaders, but the sages. And a lot of times the sages were the leaders, but they're not always quite the same. And I want to describe what it means to be a sage here, because I know we have many people in this place of life. And I want to honor you because you are an Ayil, because of the strength that you have. A sage is someone with experience, usually someone with age. But age does not make you a sage. Years of living life wisely, living life God's way, being in God's care over years is what makes a person a sage. And what's unique about a sage is not only that they are just wise, but they have perspective because they've seen many things. They have experience. And a sage has perspective to be able to look at life, someone else's life. So, for example, sages in my life are able to look at my life and give me perspective that I do not have. In other words, they say, Brian, you think the world is working this way, but it's really not. Or even get personal, they say, you think this really matters, Brian, but it really doesn't. Sages give perspective. Here's what else sages do. They don't necessarily lead the army into battle. They don't always work in all the details and make the decisions, but sages influence and inspire. And when they don't, there is always a gap in every community when the sages of the community do not influence and do not inspire. They have a strength that is unique to them because of their life experience, where they are in life, and having many years with God. Those types of people are referred to in the scriptures as Ayils. They have their own strength. So you have the young fighting men, and then you have the sages. And they both have something to offer. It's very neat. So if you take the use of Ayil as it relates to leaders and chiefs, you could say to be an Ayil means to provide leadership and wisdom for those that are around you. It's not just for the sages. You can do this when you're young, but I did want to honor the sages that are with us because they do this in a very special way. Fifth use of the word is rams. This seems really strange because I'm talking about the animal. But in ancient cultures, there were certain animals that were revered above other animals, that they were signs of nobility and wealth and power. And so you have animals like horses and lions, but the ram was one of those animals. It was rare, and it was strong, and its features were beautiful. And so a lot of times kings would use the ram as one of their symbols. And so you can study ancient cultures, and you find out ram was this sign of nobility through many different cultures, not just the Israelites. But what made the Israelites interesting when it came to rams is they offered this animal that was a sign of strength and nobility as a sacrifice to God. They did not give God the second best. They gave God the best. The best lambs, the best goats, the best rams, but the ram itself was the best of all the animals. God gave Israel a very complicated system of sacrifices, and they sacrificed a number of animals throughout the year, goats, sheep, and rams. And they were to follow this instruction. And so if you were in Israel and you would hear the word Ayil as it meant to describe a ram, you would know, well, this is a special animal. It's a sign of the kings, but it's also an animal that represents sacrifice, a noble sacrifice. Leviticus 6:6 is an example of this. And as a penalty, they must bring to the priest, that is to the Lord, their guilt offering, a ram, here's the word, Ayil, from the flock, one without defect and of the proper value. So in Israel, an Ayil was something that represented sacrifice. So put all these things together, you get a very diverse picture of what it means to be strong or to be a strong one. Let me give you one more connection with this idea of rams. So the ram's horns were called ayils. The dyed ram skins are called ayils. And you say, well, I don't know about the ram skins. Well, you do know about what they decorated. You know about the tabernacle, the movable temple of God, God's dwelling place among his people that was movable. That temple was wrapped in dyed ram skins, the ayils. Now, here's a neat connection. I don't have time to describe it, but I'm just going to throw it out there. God's movable temple, his dwelling place with his people, is covered in the skins of a strong one. A picture, a foreshadow of a future temple of God dwelling with his people wrapped in human skin. Jesus. It's not a coincidence. They're there for a reason. I won't explain any more about that. There's not enough time because I want to get to the point of how Jesus provides a great example of us, of what it means to be a strong one. You put all these things together, you're almost there, but we need to see an example of the greatest, the strongest person that has ever lived. Genesis chapter 22 is a story that's all about Jesus, even though he's not mentioned in it. It's a foreshadow, it's a picture, it's a blueprint of what he would do for all of us someday. And in this story, it's a story about a man named Abraham. And Abraham was a good man. And he loved God, and he followed God, and he trusted God. And he was living in relationship with God. And so part of this relationship is from time to time, God would tell Abraham to go away and make sacrifices, like we read in Leviticus. Well, on one particular time, God asked Abraham to go and make a sacrifice, but this time it was to sacrifice something much more dear than a ram, an Ayil. It was to sacrifice his one and only son. And I'll be the first to admit, this story is disturbing. I do not like it. I can't explain away all the dislike about the story. But what I can tell you is that the story occurred, and the Lord gives it to us in Scripture, not just to make the point that God was testing Abraham. He did that. But he could have tested him many other ways. God is giving us this story to understand a future sacrifice that would take place. I mean, I hope you figured out that of all these intense and complicated theological themes that are in the Bible, that if you go to seminary, you hear all these words and you get confused. I don't even know why they do that. But that's what happens. You go and you learn these things. But did you know that in the Scriptures, God gives us stories to understand the complex theological ideas? And this is one of those stories about a strong one dying so that others could live. Abraham's up on the mountain. He knows sacrifice has to be made. A ram has to die so that his family can live. One can die for another. One can die for many. This is the idea. So he's up there. He's getting ready to sacrifice his son. It's probably a terrible moment for him. And the Lord intervenes. In verse 12, it says, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. And don't do anything to him." I mean, this isn't just good news for Isaac. This is good news for Abraham. God says, "Now I know that you fear God because you have not been willing to withhold anything from me, even your son, your one and only son." Then verse 13. Abraham looked, because remember, a sacrifice has to be made, right? A sacrifice must be made so that others can live. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram. Not a goat, not a sheep, not a bull, a ram. An ayil. It's the word in Hebrew. It occurs in Genesis 22:13. Caught by its horns, he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Here's what this story is a picture of, and here's how it connects to Jesus being an example to us. The ultimate strong one stood in the place of every person. God says, do not touch Joe or Mary or Brian. Do not lay a hand on them. There is another that will stand in their place. And it's not just second best, it's the strong one of history. It's the one and only son that would stand in our place, that he would lose his life so that we might live. He'll take the hit for us. The whole point of the story is to help us understand what Jesus would do someday. So Jesus is an Ayil. What do we learn from him? It's not just about taking responsibility, but it's about laying down your life. This is what Ayils do. It's one thing to say an Ayil is a sacrifice made to God. It's another thing to be the sacrifice yourself. Now, hopefully, none of us will ever have to crawl up on a cross or on an altar and offer our lives to the Lord. Although there are people who love God the way we do that do that every day. Hopefully we'll never have to. But the Lord asks us every day to make sacrifices for him and for other people, doesn't he? And I'm thinking of the passage in Ephesians when Paul is writing about marriage, and he says to husbands, and remember back in ancient times, women and wives had no rights. And he says to husbands, don't abuse your wives. Lay down your life for them, because that's what you do with strength. Be a sacrifice for them. Lose yourself for your family. This is what Jesus does. So we learn from Jesus taking responsibility and offering yourself as a sacrifice. So put all these things together. I'm going to go through the list. This is the vision that God speaks over us. One that provides direction and relief for others. One that provides structure and one that can carry a heavy load on others' behalf. Someone that has courage enough to protect and to move forward with life with some good ambition. One that can provide leadership and wisdom, and one that can lay down their life. Do you see how this is an entirely different definition of strength, at least compared to the way the world defines strength? These are not externals. This is internal character work. This is the work that no one sees, that God does in our lives when we put ourselves in his care. Day after day, week after week, year after year. He takes the brokenhearted, those that are in despair, and he turns them into these beautiful things. It's such an honored title if something was called an Ayil back then. And it still is today. We need these stories. We need to relearn strength. I just want a little mention of something about helping relearn what strength is and how to use it. Our culture tells us that the things that we should esteem, the things that we should want to be like, the things that are strong, are all things that are superficial, right? Appearance, certain abilities. Our kids are told all the time that they should be more worried about their image than their character. We're told that. There's people in the room that let Facebook rob them of their joy when they don't get enough likes. I mean, that's insane. How is that happening? We have the Lord to love us and give us our joy. And we let Facebook rob us. It's because we have bought into the lie that things are about what the world says, superficial beauty, strength, accomplishments. We need better stories. We need better examples. I'm going to recommend 2 books. I think everyone should read them. I think if you have kids, you should read them to your kids. It's by an author named Eric Metaxas. He's a great author. He actually wrote VeggieTales, but I'm not referring you to VeggieTales, don't worry. But he wrote the very long biography on William Wilberforce called Amazing Grace. He also wrote one on Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany. But he has 2 newer books called 7 Men and 7 Women. 7 men and the keys to their greatness, and 7 women and the keys to their greatness. And every chapter he describes one of 7 different people, ordinary people who struggled, who suffered, who went through almost the prerequisite to become strong, and they came out on the other end, still wounded, but a strong one that was planted for the Lord's splendor and the joy and care of other people. Incredible stories. I want my boys to know that the reason Jackie Robinson did what he did and was able to do it is because he loved Jesus and let Jesus love him. That's why he was able to keep his mouth shut and not fight back when others deserved it. Or how about Rosa Parks? You know, it wasn't a coincidence that she became the face of the bus boycott. She was chosen. A meek, you know what meek means? Strong, yet gentle. Strength under control. She was a meek woman who had been in the care of Jesus for many years. And those that were putting it together said, we need a strong woman who had been in the care. We need an Ayil. And they chose her. Now some would say, oh, what an honor. That wasn't an honor. That was a horrible job to have. But you know what Ayils do? They do the jobs that no one else wants to do because they know that someone needs to do it. I think of Pope John Paul. His story's in one of the books. He grew up under the oppression of communism. He grew up around anti-Semitism, and he made a vow when he was young that if he ever had influence and power, he would use it to fight both ideologies, which he did. And he was a humble man. We live in a world that celebrates image and superficiality. We need to be in a world, or we need to create a world where we honor true strength. This type of strength at every level comes only from first receiving it from God. If you want to direct someone, shelter someone, carry a load for them, give them wisdom or care, you must first receive those things from the Lord. If you ever want to lay down your life in a meaningful way for people over and over again, you need to let him do that for you. This type of strength that Ayil describes does not need promoted. It does not need a stage. It does not need to be noticed. It is self-authenticating in itself. It's incredible. It's powerful, and people see it, and they value it when they're around it. This type of strength has to be received. 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 32 through 36 describes another place the word Ayil, or a derivative of the word, is used. And so you can see it up there. It's a word related to Ayil, and it also means the strong ones. And look what it's used to describe. It's the second word for feet. The deer on the rocky places, when life is rocky, when the ground is uncertain, it's the hind legs that allow a deer to navigate that uncertain place. It's the Ayil, the strong legs. But look how it's described. Only God can do this for a person. That's why I want to show you this. God is the rock. He's the source of strength. He's the one that puts the fight in us, the strength in us. What happens is when you let God do this for you, when this vision becomes not just something that could be, but something that is happening, you do not need to back away from life and its struggles. You do not need to apologize for your faith. You do not need to apologize for the hope that you have. You do not need to hesitate to help people. You lean into life. You don't back away from it. You lean in with confidence and strength and humility, and you bless people. And you know what else you do? You take risks, the right risks. This is what the Lord does for us. Because he does it for us, there's no room to be proud. Like I said, there's nothing to prove. I want to end by showing you the point to Ayil. Isaiah chapter 61, verses 3 and 4, we see the point to strength. All power, influence, strength, talent, experience, gifts, whatever it is that you have that's good. By the way, you could also throw in there your weakness, okay? What is the point of all of it? But right now we're talking about strength. What's the point of all of these strong qualities? To make God famous. What does it say? A display of his splendor. To make God famous and for the joy and service of other people. Verse 4, they will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. In other words, those people that are victims, that have lost their homes, will come back and build homes for others. Your strength is not about you. It is a gift for you. You do not need to apologize for it, but it is for the Lord's splendor and for the joy of others. I think that's why Jesus said, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Why did he say that they will inherit the earth? Well, because they can be trusted. The meek can be trusted. You don't give the earth to someone weak or someone selfish or prideful. You give this great gift to those that have a strength and a humility to know what it's for. So for those of you in the room, they're like, man, I am not in a place where I feel strong at all. Let me just remind you, this is not your vision for yourself. It's not Brian's vision for you. This is God's vision for you. And you need to do some work this week listening to God's voice to speak to you about this. It's almost too much to take in when you're in a tough spot. It's almost too much to take in to say, man, life is dead. My life is ashes. How are you ever going to take this spirit of despair and do something different? This is God's vision. Did you know that no one believes in you more or will ever believe in you more than Jesus does right now? I mean, think how moving that is. The strongest man that has ever lived, the wisest man, the most successful man, the most caring man that has ever lived, believes in you more than anyone else ever will, including yourself. And when he says that you are to become an Ayil, he means it. It's a title that is a gift. You know who reminds me of Ayils today? Some of the obvious ones, like good bosses, police officers, coaches, the good ones, they remind me of Ayils. But you know who else reminds me of Ayils? Teachers, great-grandparents, of course, mothers. Moms are like, they just got it. They're Ayils. They are not weak. Don't mess with mom. At least I'm scared of my mom, my mother-in-law, and my wife. It's not just a perspective, but it's you become an Ayil when you know where your strength comes from and what it's for. For anyone in the room that doesn't know Jesus, you don't have a relationship with him, this message will not make sense. This will not take root unless you know him. You need to put yourself in his care. And you do that by beginning a relationship with him. It's absolutely essential that you know him. You can't get through life. You can't end up on this other end of being one of those strong ones without him. There's no way around it. You need him. And so if anyone in the room is in that place, it's really simple, but it's hard to do. You give him your life. You can do it through a prayer, through faith, through a conversation that you have with God, but it's very difficult to do, to give him your life. But that's what he asks for, and in return, he gives us a life that we could not have on our own. He always says, my life for yours. I want to end with a quote that just reminds us of all of our need for him. We're talking about strong ones. Maybe you've got your confidence up, but I want to keep us humble and know that it only comes from him. This is from an old minister that I like. His name's Richard John Newhouse, and this is how the quote goes. It says, nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true and beautiful or good makes complete sense in an immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we must be saved by love. And no virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of a friend or a foe as it is from our standpoint. In other words, we're always more impressed with our behaviors than others. Okay? Therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. Let me tell you why I love the quote. We need from him forgiveness, love, hope, and faith. There is a strong one who stood in our place to give us these things. And he then, in turn, turns us more and more into his character. Part of being like Jesus is you are strong like Jesus. You are meek like Jesus. All right, lastly, I want to give you a blessing. This is kind of neat. In Jewish life, and it continues today, they have this battle cry. And back before the time of Jesus, they would cry out this battle cry. And even today, when they go into war, they use this as their battle cry, okay? And it goes like this. It's Rock Hazak. So it just sounds awesome, too, all right? Rock Hazak. Let's put it on shirts, all right? Let's put it on bumper stickers. It's fourth service. Rock Hazak. It's a battle cry. But you know what? Even cooler than a battle cry, it was a blessing and a vision for the people it was spoken to. So I'm going to give you examples of when Rock Hazak was said and most likely said, okay? So we know it was said when Joshua is getting ready to go into the promised land and face giants. God says to him, Rock Hazak. You're wondering what it means. Well, I'll tell you in a moment. When David spoke to Solomon, his last conversation with his son that would rule his kingdom. Think how intimate that is, a conversation between a dad and his son at the end. He says to his son, Rock Hazak. Paul said to Timothy this phrase. And being Jews, I'm sure he probably used the phrase Rock Hazak. In Ephesians, this phrase shows up when it's talking about the armor of God and staying in the fight. And fighting the good fight. In Corinthians, when it says to these guys who weren't acting like men, it says, act like men. This phrase also shows up, Rak Hazak. You know what Rak Hazak means? It's a blessing. It means be strong. It means be strong. Be strong when you face the giants. Be strong when you face the grief of losing your dad. Be strong when you have to lead. Be strong when you engage in spiritual warfare. Be strong when you're trying to grow up. Be strong. And it's not like, hey, stop being weak, be strong. It's spoken as a blessing. This is who you are. You are not weak. You are strong. At least the way God describes it. So, Father, thank you for an incredible word. Thank you that you brought it to us. We're grateful tonight that you would think so much of us. That you would look at the mess of our lives, and the words that were used, they're really not even enough to describe the mess that we find ourselves in from time to time. Sometimes we find ourselves in a place of self-doubt and self-hate and total failure. But you say, you know what? That's okay. I have a vision for you. That you would be an Ayil, a strong one, the way Jesus is strong. And so, Lord, I pray that we would hear your voice, not my voice, tonight. That you would speak that over us. For those that are strong, that are already using their strength for good, I pray that they would find something in the many different uses of the word that could take them further. To be a greater splendor for you and a greater servant of others. Lord, thank you that you are the example of who we are becoming. May we keep our eyes fixed on you. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your weakness. Thank you that you take it all from us and you do something beautiful. We love you. We thank you for the way you care for us. And you lead us to a better place. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's stand together.